In the 1960s, Robert Whitebrecht, James Marsters, and Andrew Sachs, three men with hearing loss, worked together to modify the teletypewriter used by journalists to help deaf and hard of hearing people use the telephone network. Over the next several years, hundreds of volunteers from across the United States refurbished, serviced, and delivered these surplus machines to thousands of deaf and hard of hearing people, for the first time enabling them to communicate by phone with their deaf friends and relatives. Although the machines were huge, some weighing as much as 200 pounds, nothing could stop these dedicated pioneers from their mission to bring communications to their communities, sometimes hiring 18-wheeler trucks to do so. Later in the same decade, a deaf man named Paul Taylor took these TTYs and contracted with a local business to create the first telecommunications relay service in St. Louis, Missouri, allowing people who were deaf and hard of hearing to communicate with hearing people by telephone for the first time. The rest, as they say, is history. These early innovators paved the way for people with disabilities to use telecommunications services so they could more effectively participate in society and lead fuller, more independent, and productive lives. I say hats off to the ADA, to its 20th anniversary, and to the people who breathed real life into the law.
I remember the first day when we got this package from the guy in California who sent us the modem. I couldn't wait for Paul to come home. I said, "Look, we got something." We opened it. There was a modem. And he went and got the old Western Union machine. And with instructions, he hooked it up while I watched. Then he took the second machine up to my father's office, 2 blocks away, and set it up so he could call me to see if it worked. And I was standing there with my hand on the phone to feel the phone ring, and I waited. When the phone rang, I picked it up, put the receiver in the modem, and started typing, "Hello." Then the word "hi" came on from the other end. It works! We got so excited. Then Paul said, "Okay, I'm hanging up and coming home. Bless you." So exciting.
And we all who joined the relay service would chip in, bought a modem, and connected it to go with a TTY. I installed it. Oh my gosh, overnight. It was a big sensation. It went quickly into overload. Everyone was called in, barraging us. I have to call my hearing friends or my hearing family. It was constant. It was swamped. I can think of so many hardships deaf people have had to go through without technology or telecommunications. The world that hearing people took for granted. When we watched television, all we saw were mouths fluttering with nothing coming out. There were no captions. I would ask time and again for someone to tell us what was being said, and I became a pest to whoever was sitting next to me. I endured the many annoyed and exasperated expressions on their faces. Now I know they meant nothing by it, but at the same time, I felt as though I was imposing on the people around me who could hear.
Well, one evening at my house when my son was 3 years old, he was playing with his toys and he tripped on his own feet and knocked out 2 of his teeth while he was playing. And to save this 3-year-old's teeth, we needed to find an emergency dentist open at 8:30 in the evening. I was 6 months pregnant and I was running and knocking on neighbors' doors knocking on their doors to find somebody home to call the dentist. And fortunately, we found a neighbor 3 houses down who called the dentist and saved my son's teeth. But really, that should have just been a simple call from our own home, as it is today.
When I was very young, about 1964, 1965, my family and another deaf family went up to the New York World's Fair. And we saw an exhibit there that showed video phones. Imagine that, way back then. Myself and other CODA kids went to one side, communicated with our parents through video phones to the other side. We signed, we joked, we had fun, we told stories. It was fabulous. I asked the man there exhibiting, when will this be sold? Because this has great application for deaf people. He told me 10 years. Okay, so I believed him. I worked hard. I babysat and I earned money and I saved money to purchase a video phone for my mom and dad. Well, it didn't come true until the 1990s.
A core function of government is to help people help themselves when all else fails. In that regard, the Federal Communications Commission has had a long-standing commitment of ensuring communication systems serve disabled Americans. In this spirit, during my tenure on the Commission, I have wholeheartedly supported efforts to improve the availability and choices of communication services for people with disabilities. With telecommunications relay services, for example, the Commission has helped ensure that persons with hearing and speech disabilities obtain functionally equivalent communication services. Additionally, I was proud to have worked with my fellow commissioners and the Hearing Aid Compatibility Joint Consensus Working Group to update the Commission's rules governing hearing aid compatible mobile handsets. By tackling such issues, the Commission has acknowledged that the surest path to America's continued vitality, strength, and vibrancy is through realizing and enabling the contributions and full potential of all of its citizens. So it is fitting that we recognize the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was enacted to address such goals.
That was in 1989 when relay services were not yet available, except a few isolated voluntary instances, but it was nothing to write home about, a very shoestring operation. My brother's workaround was to call deaf people directly on their TTY lines and prospect only deaf clients that way. But doesn't that demonstrate the divide, like the Berlin Wall, isolating deaf people from hearing people? Any deaf financial advisor should be able to call a potential hearing client, but at the time, in 1989, it was not available. Certainly now one can do so quite readily through the relay service. So that Berlin Wall has come crashing down.
I have a unique opportunity to observe that because I teach a course called Communication Accessibility at Gallaudet. And from the time I began to teach in the Department of Communication Studies, I think it was 14 years ago, I can remember bringing in the Wintel pager and passed it around the room, and they were just amazed, and they did not have anything like this 15 years ago, did not have it.
I remember what it was like when I was a child, and I witnessed firsthand what discrimination was like when I saw my father try to ask the bank for a loan. Our family farm had been damaged by a bad storm. We lost the crops that had been damaged and planted that year, and we needed to borrow money from the bank to help us sustain the farm, just as many other farmers need to do in similar situations. But unfortunately for us, we were denied that opportunity solely because the bankers didn't believe that a deaf family could even manage a farm. As a result, our lives changed. We had to auction off most of our possessions, and we had to move to the city in order to look for work. And it wasn't long after that that my father died of a heart attack, and I always wondered if it, in many ways, was attributed to a broken heart. I vowed to make sure that this didn't happen to others, that we, deaf and hard of hearing people, could do anything and be anything that we wanted to. The only difference was that we couldn't hear.
As my hearing loss progressed, it seemed that there was always something that was there to help me function differently. Then, lo and behold, along comes caption telephone. And so I'm like, oh my God, this is a dream come true.
Title IV of the ADA requires telephone companies to provide telecommunications relay services so that people with hearing and speech disabilities can communicate with other people by phone. Although this service started with telephone conversations only between TTY users and voice telephone users, over the past 20 years, the FCC has approved many other innovative forms of relay services, including video relay services that allow the use of communication in sign language, speech-to-speech services, which enable people who have difficult to understand speech to communicate through a communication assistant, and caption telephone relay services, which allow individuals who can speak to both read captions of what other parties to a call say and at the same time use any residual hearing to hear that person's words. Through each of these advancements, we have strived to bring Americans with hearing and speech disabilities who rely on those services one step closer to achieving communication that both fully meets their needs and is functionally equivalent to the voice telephone services upon which hearing Americans rely.
Until one time, I bumped my head in the kitchen and fell to the ground, and I didn't know what to do, and my wife was not around. I ended up crawling on the floor over to where the video relay camera and system is. I couldn't get up, so I decided to hold my hand up in the air and sign 911, 911 to the operator. And the operator came online, and I explained to her what was going on, and it worked.
Somebody who's blind is able to get information from only one spot on a computer screen or a visual screen at a time. Somebody who can see can look across the screen and see relationships. For somebody who's blind, we have to have technology that helps us make those relationships.
People don't have excuses anymore. It's true. You can no longer tell deaf people, sorry, you cannot use the phone, so you cannot perform this job. No. VRS is there too now. But it wasn't that long ago that making calls was a huge obstacle.
Since ADA was enacted 20 years ago, the FCC has been a proud partner in helping to ensure that Americans with disabilities can participate in our society through communications technologies. After all, each of us benefits when every citizen is able to connect and use our telecommunications networks and fully participate in our mass media. Shared ideas, experiences, and participation by all enable us to be connected so that we are indeed one nation. By requiring hearing aid compatibility, closed captioning, and access to telecommunications equipment and services, we have broken down some significant barriers that prevented individuals from fully participating in and contributing to our society. Today, millions of Americans are empowered, allowing for more ease in conducting business and communicating with family and friends. And as we have expanded access, the technologies created to allow innovative use of communication devices has also been employed in some remarkably unanticipated ways by many Americans. For example, closed captioning of television programs is now ubiquitous in bars, gyms, and airports, permitting numerous people who cannot hear the audio due to external circumstances to follow the programming. So to all of the partners in progress, I say thank you for introducing incredible innovation and inspiring all of us to do more. I am excited to see what the next 20 years will bring.
The world has become completely different. Equal access. In fact, sometimes I even get information before hearing people do, thanks to closed captioning, thanks to access to relay services or the internet. The world has opened up to me as a deaf person.
So much of the web now is under the so-called Web 2.0 is being generated by users, the user-generated content, by people creating pages who have no background in accessibility. And therefore, it's more important than ever that the accessibility has to be built into the tools that are being used to create web pages so that the default settings are an accessible environment.
For example, it would be nice if someday, when we needed interpreters for meetings, weddings, funerals, business meetings, or conference calls, to have an interpreter materialize as a hologram. You know, the kind depicted in the Star Trek movies and television series? They could appear instantly out of thin air, voice for the deaf person, sign for the hearing person, and after the conversation disappear just as quickly with me still there.
You know, access to information and communications technology is so critical. We know that if it doesn't happen, we won't have jobs. We won't be able to vote. We won't be able to interact with society. We won't be able to, you know, write a letter to our senators or whatever the case may be. We're not going to be able to participate. And so for us to meet the goals of the ADA, we really need to be able to have access to that information and communications technology.
I dream for relay services. Especially for people who have difficulty talking.
But all people.
But for all people who have speech disabilities. To be able to talk on the phone.
Talk on the phone. Or to communicate over the phone.
Or to communicate over the phone.
I know
I know how wonderful it's been.
Wonderful it's been.
For me to be able to talk on the phone.
I want to have two functional equivalency. When I use telecommunications, I want to have the same speed that someone who's hearing and another person who's hearing have with dial tone and use of conversation. I want to be able to get it anywhere at any time. I want to have all the bells and whistles. If there's caller ID, I want caller ID. If there's avatars, I want one of those too.
And if I look ahead another 20 years, what I hope that I would see in technology would be that the innovators, the designers, have had a totally different experience when they are growing up through the training and initial work in their careers, and where people are trained to design and develop in a way that is cognizant of the full diversity of human differences, the different way people function, the different ways people learn, the different ways that people have their best styles of working and so forth. And disability is really just one dimension of all that diversity. And
the worst disability is attitude, the erroneous attitudes of people around them. Now those erroneous attitudes, I think that attitudes of people the biggest hindrance to technological development. So if people have the right attitude, it's a home run. I have 10 grandchildren. 6 are hearing, 4 are deaf. Of the deaf grandchildren, their ages are 14, 12, 10, and 8. What do I want for them? A life where they can communicate freely with anyone they want at any time.
The ADA, one of our nation's proudest civil rights laws, represented a milestone in America's commitment to full and equal opportunity for all its citizens. The ADA and the communication accessibility laws that followed it promoted inclusiveness and sparked innovation. The extraordinary growth in communications technologies continues at a rapid pace, and some of these technologies aren't yet accessible to people with disabilities. Imagine not being able to use the internet or a smartphone, or not being able to text message or even watch television. Most of us don't have to consider such a world, but for many individuals with disabilities, inaccessible technology impedes access to the freedoms and opportunities of the digital age. We've come a long way over the past 20 years, but we still have more to do so that any American, regardless of disability, can communicate with family and friends, have access to the opportunities of telehealth and distance learning, and fully participate in our economy and our democracy. Evolving technologies hold almost unlimited potential to make this happen, and over the next 20 years, we look forward to meeting this challenge. Happy 20th anniversary, ADA.